Hi guys, welcome to this video on language and concepts, and in this video I will be discussing both a paper by Benjamin Lee Whorf, Science and Linguistics, and a reading by Dehaene about numbers, number words, and mathematical ability. So we use language to describe the world and to make claims in language that we deem to be true or false. Here's one that we talked about on the very first day of class. It's raining. Is this true or false? Well, as we saw on that first day with those first discussions, immediately what we want to do when we're presented with this phrase or sentence or proposition is to look out the window. And I'm in Southern California right now. I look out and I see that there's no water falling from the sky. So my initial reaction would be to say, no, it's not raining. But as a number of you realized on the first day, maybe it's raining somewhere. So this seems to, when we first think about it's raining, we think that maybe it's, the relevant location is right outside my window, but maybe somebody is watching this video in a different location and it is in fact raining there. And if it's raining somewhere, then it is raining. So there's a good deal of subjectivity here. And there also might be disagreement about if the stuff falling from the sky counts as actual rain. So if it's really light, maybe we would say that it doesn't count as raining. Sometimes when you're walking and you have an umbrella, you're trying to decide if you should actually open up your umbrella or not. You're sort of making a judgment about if it's actually going to rain or if it's just going to do something very light. If it's snowing, does that count as it's raining? If it's hailing, does that count as it's raining? And we have all these other questions as well about what exactly the world has to be like for this to be true, even if we've narrowed it down to a specific location. So there is metaphysics hidden in claims like this. So metaphysics is a whole branch of philosophy that looks at what makes that thing really that thing. So here, what really is rain? Asking that question is asking a metaphysical question about rain. And in other words, we're asking, how does this word map on to the world? When does the word rain actually apply to the world? And sometimes we have disagreements about if certain words really describe the world. So here is one such disagreement. We'll watch this 2-minute video.
It's wiggling. No, it's raining. No. Hey, it's wiggling. No, it's raining. No, it's wiggling. No, it's raining. My mom told me it's wiggling. It was raining. No. Yes, it is. My mom told me it was wiggling, not raining. My mom said it is raining. No, my mom told me it's wiggling. Because my mom said it's raining. No, my mom said it's wiggling. My mom said it's raining. Ow! My mom said it's. Say sorry to the wiggling. My mom told me it's wiggling. My mom is not. It's it's wiggling outside, maybe. It's raining. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, you're pretty. And you're not real. I'm real. Watch. We're going to go out there and see. I'm not going to see anymore. Watch is not going to see. Watch. We're going to go out there and watch. It was just raining. Little clay. It's raining. You broke my heart. Little clay. You broke my heart. Turn around and then I'm gonna get honey. And her kid do that. Okay. Deal. You broke my heart. Turn around.
Okay, so in this video we saw a vigorous debate about if it's sprinkling or if it's raining, and this is obviously super cute because the kids seem to think that there's a contradiction here between it's sprinkling and it's raining, when in fact it can probably be both. Or, maybe if we want to be sticklers, we would want to draw a metaphysical distinction between sprinkling and raining and say one of them is right and the other one is wrong. And if we want to come down in one way or another on this question, that raises this other question. Is this a distinction in the world or in mere language? That is, is there really a thing that is raining out there? Is there really a thing out there in the world that is called sprinkling that we can describe? And in other words, is that about the world, or is this just the way that our language happens to be? It's hard to even piece those two apart, but it seems that we're talking about the world sometimes, other times maybe we're talking about the language, and it can be easy to run the two together. If we don't stop and think about it, we assume that the world maps onto our way of describing it. And this is one of the things that Benjamin Lee Whorf draws attention to in his article. So, as Whorf writes, every person carries through life certain naive but deeply rooted ideas about talking and its relation to thinking. As he writes, we take our way of talking to be common sense or natural logic, that our words and our concepts, our way of carving up the world, truly describes the world. So one of the cases that Whorf discusses in that reading, and that I asked you guys about in the worksheet that you completed for today, is the word for water. In English, we have one word for water. All of the different types of water in these different pictures, we describe in the same way. So on the left, when it's waves, out in an ocean, when it is in a fountain, when it is in a waterfall, when it's at a lake, we call all that stuff water. We also call it water when it's in a glass or in a bottle, or when we're about to drink it or use it for cooking. In the Hopi language, the Native American language that he discusses, there are two different words there. So I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce these, but pahi and kei. So pahi is the word to describe water that's flowing, water that's out there, and also water that's a shared communal resource. Kei is the word to describe water that's still and water that I've taken out from that communal resource and made my own. So it seems here that maybe we would also want to say that the Hopi not only have two different words for water, they have two different water concepts. And even as I was describing it just then, maybe you realized, hey, actually there are kind of two different ways that we view and use water. There's water for drinking, water that's mine, water that is still, and water that's moving and out there. And we do relate to those two different types of waters in different ways. So maybe it does make sense to have the two different water words and two different water concepts. Or, maybe you want to stick to the English word water and say, no, it's all just water. It's actually one thing. And that's the way the world really is. And here's another quote from Whorf. He says, "We dissect nature along lines laid down by our native language. The categories and types that we isolate from the world of phenomena we do not find there because they stare every observer in the face. On the contrary, the world is presented in a kaleidoscopic flux of impressions which has to be organized by our minds." And of course, the way that we organize the world by our minds is with words. In there. Okay. Oh. So let me ask you this. Here's a picture of the world. How many different plants are in this picture? Well, that's a hard question to answer, right? And our answer to this question relies on how we want to carve up the world. It also depends on our capacity to have words for all of these different things. So me looking at this, I am not so good with plants. I grew up hiking around in Minnesota. There are some trees that I can identify by looking at their leaves, but the only even possible one for that is this tree on the right, and I can't really tell from that picture. I probably know maybe like 20 different tree words. And if I knew what that tree was on the right, that would help me to count that tree. And then even there on the left, it sort of looks like those are all the same, but if I were more knowledgeable about trees, maybe I would be able to tell that, oh, it looks like there's just, one tree there or one little plant, but actually there are two plants next to each other. So I'm quite limited in doing this. Another question we could ask about this picture is how many different greens are there, or how many different colors are there? Well, it depends how we want to carve up colors, right? Carve up greens. And if somebody were a forest ranger, they'd probably be really good at the first question. If somebody's maybe a graphic designer, where they work with color all day, maybe they would carve up the greens in different ways than we would. And I hope this draws into focus the question, or the point, that maybe there really is no answer of how many different greens there are. Maybe it just depends where you want to draw the boundaries between one green and another. So here's another quote from Whorf. "When we bring in the native languages of the Americas, the fact that languages dissect nature in many ways becomes patent. That is, becomes obvious." So we can think of that with the Hopi and water, and their different water words and water concepts. Or, as with the previous slide, we can think of this in terms of different people in our linguistic community, but who know a lot more words and then thus seem to have a lot more concepts. So maybe green concepts or plant concepts. So as Whorf writes, "The relativity of all conceptual systems, ours included, and their dependence upon language stands revealed." We saw in the Dehaene reading that different number words can also affect mathematical ability. And we might want to think more broadly about how much is mathematics dependent on number words. Are there different ways of carving up the world? We might also ask, is any mathematical ability innate? And what if we didn't have any number words at all in our culture? Could we still know that there are 8 of these? Would we be able to recognize this quantity if you wanted me to give you the same number of apples as you had strawberries, or we wanted to do an even trade? Would we be able to do that if we didn't have number words? Is the concept of 8 contingent on having that word 8 and knowing how to count, knowing how to apply it to the world? And some other research on other indigenous groups has shown that, in fact, linguistic ability, the ability to count, is dependent on having number words. So humans have an innate number sense up to quantities of only 4. And we share this with other animals as well. We can distinguish quantities up to 4 without counting, basically just by looking. We can see that 4 is more than 3, that 3 is more than 2, that 2 is more than 1, that 4 is more than 1, and so on. But without the capacity to count, which requires number words, we can't say trade 8 objects for 8 other objects. We're not able to do that. There's a group in the Amazon called the Piraha, and that's one group that has been studied quite a bit, and it's been demonstrated that without number words, we don't have these capacities. So sometimes when we lack the words, we lack the capacity to see the world through that lens, to carve the world up in that way, and to utilize those concepts in our daily lives. So the reason that the Piraha don't have numbers and number words is because it's just not needed in their society. It's not a way of carving up the world that serves their purposes. Similarly, for most of us, we don't really know that much about plants. But if we did know more plant names, maybe we would perceive this differently. So there's some other research about cognition and perception. Particular, there's work by a philosopher at Harvard named Susanna Siegel, and she discusses the ways that perception is changed with concepts and with words. So she has an example of a forest ranger looking at a forest or looking at a bunch of trees, and she argues that that person would literally perceive that differently than we do, because as they're looking, they'd be able to carve it up in a different way according to the concepts that they have and that we lack. So finally, I'm going to end this video with a quote from Whorf. This is from the last paragraph of that text. "We shall no longer be able to see a few recent dialects of the Indo-European family as the apex of the evolution of the human mind. They and our own thought processes with them can no longer be envisioned as spanning the gamut of reason and knowledge, but only as one constellation in a galactic expanse."